I hit the button. What are we doing? Hey, team players. Joe Rocky with the local football flavor coming at you. Dude, it feels so much good to be back to the normal day, Bob. I just got to tell you that outright. Excited to be part of this back on our normal
Wednesday
Thursdays.
was weird. Wednesday was
it was weird, but Thanksgiving was fun, right?
Yeah, I mean, I finally won a bet on Thanksgiving and then summarily dropped it on a couple mega lays because that's my thing. You know, when you're betting $1, you got to go for the mega lays sometimes. And when you're betting 10 cents, I almost hit one. I did almost hit one this week. I was about a couple yards away here or there with a couple of the bets. And the one I put against Paul, Justin Fields, sucked. So that sucked. Yeah,
Bob,
what are you going to do?
We're 64% against the spread. Just put $100 on all the spread bets, so you'd be way ahead right now. You'd be up $3,000. Like, what are you doing? I give you winners every week.
Nice.
You just refuse my awesomeness.
I put them into the mega lay. What are you talking about? They're in the mega lay.
They're individual bets. They're not parlays. They're against the spread, man. You can't be doing 5 against the spread every week.
I love the mega lays. They're great. They're fun. They're fun. Leave me with my fun. Leave me with my fun.
I leave you with your fun. My lighting system's falling around me, which is where we're at right now. And one of the things I want to talk about in this episode, especially kicking off here, Bob, was a player that I think is being dramatically undervalued, that is going to be a key hit when we go through the playoff run here, and a guy that if you haven't yet, you need to quit on. So where do you want to start? Good, bad, or ugly?
Let's go ugly first.
Ugly first. Bob, for some reason, I'm hearing a little bit of an echo. I'm not sure why. So the ugly first, the person you absolutely have to quit on, despite the fact that he was a darling, is Puka. Puka, when you look at his statistics, was all about giving you the value of target share. And at the end of the day, he's not getting it anymore. And as a result, his production is falling through the floor.
Well, you know, Joe, I am battling this thing with Puka right now in my own thoughts. It's that, yes, his value has gone down. Can you still hear me all right?
I am.
All right.
Got technical problems on my side. I'm fighting through here.
His value has definitely gone down. But there's been, when you look at what's been happening, though, with the Rams as a team have been kind of this up and down, what's going to happen. Now with Kyren back, I feel that Puka still has value, and I feel like the guy you actually want to give up on is Cooper Kupp.
Maybe both, but I definitely think Puka more so.
I think I was really disappointed. Don't get me wrong. I really thought Puka was a must start last week. And we said it to a couple fans that Puka was a must start. And he was. At that point in time, he was a must start based upon his prior production. But when we pull up his stats, and let's just say we pull up his stats from the last 3 games or so.
He's getting like no targets.
A good 3-game sample size for Puka is, I think, something that that's something we can go off of here. So when we go to his game log and we go to just week 9, week 11, and week 12, he's still getting 7-8 targets. We're not getting the 20 to 10 targets that he was getting at the beginning of the year, which is he started off fire and has normalized. But here's where the problem is that in week 9, he went for 32 yards on 3 receptions on 7 targets. So he's not catching half of his targets. On week 11, he caught more than half of his targets, got 70 yards and a touchdown. And last week, disappointed against Arizona with catching half of his targets, but only for 27 yards in a very Zay Flowers-like mood. But Arizona is nothing to you really. I know the Steelers are probably going to lose to them this week because that's the way the Steelers play. But when we look at where this is going at in the stat sheet, is that week 7 was his last good game. That was right before Cooper Kupp came back, and I believe on the cusp there at 154 yards. We knew that he couldn't sustain that fire production that he was at. But I expect both the Cleveland game and the Baltimore game to be slightly more competitive. And if he's still getting at least 7 to 8 targets a game, and he got a touchdown in one of those games, if he's still getting that, I think that with Kyren grinding it out on the ground, that the guy I'm less inclined to give up on out of the two would be Puka.
See, I'm more inclined for Puka than Cup, but we got a question here, Bob, and I want to jump on
Hey,
it.
Blurpy, welcome back.
So, Taysom Hill or Ferguson projected to lose by about 14. Oh, the guy you're playing is Dak Attack. Oh, it's all right. So let's just start with this concept first, Bob, because this is something that's always made me think. The other guy you're playing either has the key receiver or the quarterback of someone you're thinking about, vice versa. Do you factor that into your decision at all as a starting point?
Absolutely. 100% I do. Here's why. Because quarterbacks don't score as many points as the positional players. So if I'm going up against Dak, but I own CeeDee Lamb, obviously you're always starting CeeDee Lamb, but you're in a better position. But if I have Brandon Cooks and they have Dak, if I'm expecting Dak to have a good game, then I'm starting Brandon Cooks as well, because it's very likely that they have a chance to go hand in hand. First and second wide receivers. Now with tight ends, we have a big decision to make here, Blurpy, because you and I, owners of Jake Ferguson, have been screwed over the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks if you consider the yardage in week 10, but he did have the touchdown there. He's been underperforming the last 2 weeks against pretty terrible teams that he hasn't had to perform well against. Now, I fully expect them to throttle Seattle tonight.
Yes, I think that's fair.
I don't know which direction it will go. I don't know if it will be like the defense getting the points, or if this is going to be an offensive explosion. But Geno's still not 100% healthy. So where this would come down to then for me is the usage of Taysom Hill versus the usage of Ferguson. Now, Ferguson is still a red zone target, but they didn't use him in the red zone the last 2 weeks because they really didn't need to, right? So when we look at tight ends versus Seattle in general, and we want to see how that position has done and favored in Seattle, the tight end that most recently, or the group of tight ends that most recently had success, was week 9, the Ravens. And that's 122 yards split between two. The 49ers, which is the next best tight end, was 19 yards because the 49ers have all these weapons. Rams and Commanders, Logan Thomas had 40. So there's not a lot to be excited about with Ferguson. The touchdown potential is still there, but it's nothing to be excited about. Now, Taysom Hill, on the other hand, Taysom Hill has that weird electric explosive play upside.
And he's like Tim Tebow. Tim Tebow would have been a tight end. I mean, I think that's something,
and it's something that makes you excited. You really want to be ready to play Taysom Hill every week, but he's very likely to do just as disappointing to anybody there. So where I stand on this is, your follow-up here, Blurpy, going with the ceiling play is, I do think Ferguson will score a touchdown this week. I do think that that's a likely possibility against Seattle because they're going to be able to move the ball against Seattle's secondary.
Yes.
And tight ends and running backs tend to be the group of players that I like to start on Thursday games, notwithstanding Thanksgiving.
Well, I want to put a pause on that thought. This isn't a normal Thursday game. Both of these two played last week. That's what I'm saying. The most normal of the whole year.
Sunday game. It's a regular Sunday game.
I fully expect that Thursday night pinch not to exist tonight.
And I think that's a pure possibility. But where I worry about Taysom Hill, Blurpy, and this is just another thought and direction to take it in, is the Saints are no good at scoring. They're no good at moving the ball. Like we said last week, Derek Carr can throw for over 300 yards all he likes.
They don't finish drives.
But there's nothing that makes me say and scream that the potential explosiveness of Hill is actually something that I want to capitalize on. Because let's go to last week's game. This was a game they won 16-15, where most of their drives, if not all of their drives, I believe almost every single one, except for one, ended in a field goal. Mm-hmm. And you're looking at Derek Carr racking up 305 yards. Taysom Hill did not catch a ball on one target and only ran the ball for 4 yards.
And that's in a game where Olave got knocked out for the whole second half.
Yeah, so he provided no value to you last week. You go back and you look at the next game, or just go 2 games back, and that was the game against Carolina. And that's where he had 75 yards rushing. Mm-hmm. So, the problem, the Taysom Hill problem is that, 55 receiving yards. Yeah, sorry about that. When you look at the game against Carolina here, again, similar stuff is happening. So, Blurpy, I would say go with your gut on this one. But if I were to pick who I like better, I actually do like Ferguson a little bit better. It's very, very close. But I like the utility of Taysom Hill. So I think it's almost guaranteed that Ferguson's going to get a little bit more work. But I also like the utility of Hill. So it's very close for me. And I think for me, it's a little bit of a coin flip. Joe, what do you think?
So to give you full transparency, I just streamed Taysom Hill to be my tight end because I have the Hawk. There was no point having an extra tight end, and I needed one this week. A little upset here that Bob took my boy from Pittsburgh off of me, but I got Taysom Hill as my streaming tight end. So I am playing him this week. But if I had the choice between Hill and Ferguson, to me, this is not close. This is a team that scores 1 billion points versus one that can't finish. And the Taysom Hill experiment that we remember is always cool and fun and fond memories. But it doesn't really come out that much anymore. And I see the game script when Detroit comes to town of them not being able to do the cute stuff. The bottom line is they're going to have to try to keep up. I love Olave in that game. But I don't think Hill gets himself into a situation when they really need a score. And I think that more and more has become apparent that he is a deterrent than a helper. That being said, they're weird in New Orleans. He gets 3 running touchdowns.
Okay, so Blurpy,
I would definitely 100% go to Ferguson because I think there's a real chance they put up 5 touchdowns in Dallas tonight.
So Blurpy, this is the other thing too. Sorry about that. I was reading the stats from a different game. But if we go to the last game against Atlanta, he would have put up for you 9 points, which is good. It's good. But looking at his touches, we have 9, 3, 15, 10, 9, 8, 4. And that kind of sprays the board. So his rushing touches, unless they're inside the 5, aren't as valuable as his receiving touches in the PPR league. So you go back to the Minnesota game, put up 23 yards from scrimmage, 3 touches. That's not valuable to you. But in games where he's that 51, 68, 77, 65, where he's getting those touchdowns, that was super valuable. But with Olave out, like we know could happen, and Derek...
No, Olave's playing, dude.
I mean, he could be out. He definitely could be out. Definitely could be out. I just think that there is more to Ferguson here this week than to Taysom Hill. And that's kind of it's tough to say because I do like Taysom. You know that, Joe. I'm a big fan of Taysom Hill. I have been for a long time. And if we go to and we just go to the stats again,
like I said, it's not even really about the 2 players. It's about the fact that I'm fairly positive that the Cowboys are scoring 5 touchdowns tonight, and I'm not sure the Saints are scoring 3.
And it's
So
very
just want to play
likely,
target share. Give me the one that's going to score a billion points.
and it's very likely that Detroit capitalizes on this.
I
This
think
week.
Detroit's going to blow them out.
Detroit's definitely, they did not play well on Thanksgiving. That is absolutely for certain, Blurpy.
And you give them an extra time.
But giving them extra time to think about what they did wrong, I think the ball is going to be in the hands of the Lions more than it will be in the hands of the Saints. To be honest.
I mean, also the Lions aren't going to have 8 failed turnovers between the actual turnovers and the 0 for 5 on 4th down. The Lions aren't going to do that. So when I look at this and just say, I think that the Saints are going to be in a world of trouble in that game. And to me, without a doubt, the most disappointing team in the NFL was the New Orleans Saints. But Bob, to get back to before, I want to get to
Hope
a guy.
That helped, Blurpy. I know that was a bit confusing.
It's long story short, Ferguson though.
Yeah, but I think the long story short there is I'd be more happy throwing Ferguson out there, knowing that they're going to move the ball better than the Saints will.
Absolutely.
Joe. Sorry, I interrupted your thought. I just needed to finish that up because it's just something there. There's something there. Go
ahead. and that's fair. So to give the player that I believe is the most slept on value across fantasy leagues right now, and that is actually someone we brought up earlier, and that was Cooks. And this is the reason why. If you look from week 6 on, Cooks is the 15th highest scoring receiver. But no one knows this. He's ahead of Olave, Waddle, Devontae Adams, like names that without a doubt, 2nd and 3rd round talent, but he was hurt in the beginning of the year. And he played through an injury for 5 weeks until he got right. And most players won it. To give you a comp, Eckler was the exact same boat. He's outscoring Eckler by 1.5 points. Granted, he's a receiver, but when we look at this, the Cowboys are an enigma in this sense that so many other teams out there that are lesser passing entities, both receivers, 100% signed up, no questions asked. Give me Debo, give me Ayuk, give me Kirk, give me Ridley. And we look at this and go, Cowboys, much better passing attack. No one's loving the number 2. Part of this was the Ferguson touchdowns early while Cooks was hurt. But another thing that's taken love away from Ferguson, although I don't think it's going to be relevant tonight, is Cooks. And if you look at Cooks, he's scoring touchdowns like crazy, especially lately. Dak is spreading the touchdowns around. And if you're looking at ESPN leagues, roughly 40% of them, he's not even rostered. You can pick him up for free.
It's a little shocking.
And be able to instantly upgrade your team, get someone who's going to be, again, a top 16 receiver. This is a guy who could put you through the playoffs or into the playoffs and then through them. And I think that it's someone that really a lot of people are sleeping on. And it's because he had a slow start. I get it. You put up 1, 3, 4 points like he did in the first 5 games. Your average is horrible.
Right.
But since then, dude's on fire. He's had 1 bad game since week 6. And every receiver's going to give you a dud here and there. But he, like I said, ahead of Devontae Adams, ahead of Olave, ahead of Waddle. Like, this is some serious talents ahead. And then, of course, the next tier down. So
yeah, and his dud was against Philadelphia. And that game was – they lost that game. So, yeah, okay. All right, I'm jiving with that.
I'm telling you, Cooks, especially Cooks at home, is on fire.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't paying attention to Cooks, and that's something that I think when we speak of players too, and I know we touched on this player last week, but I cannot suggest enough about Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson to me is one of those guys that if you rostered him and have been holding on to him for a long time, that now, especially if you're fighting for a playoff spot and your quarterback hasn't, and you've drafted a Derek Carr or you drafted your Anthony Richardson or whatever, and they've been down on their luck, Russell Wilson is one of those players that at this point in time, I think it's at your benefit to start him. Granted, I'm not like I said, I'm rostering Cortland Sutton and I'm keeping him as one of my bench spots, and I'm fairly happy with that. I'm okay with that. I'm not rostering Judy as much, but
No.
Russell Wilson's value comes in that he's a rushing and passing quarterback. He didn't do either well last year because the coaching was awful, but we saw him get better at the end of last year, and we talked about this, but we look at this Cleveland game that just happened. You go through and you read the stat sheets and you say, they won this game 29-12. He completed 13 for 22.
And that's good defense. I mean, I know that they got hurt, that Garrett got hurt. That's still a good defense.
And he put up only 134 yards passing, which was bad considering for him. He hasn't done that since against Kansas City, where he put up 114, but he put up 3 touchdowns that game. And then you come back and you look, he had 11 carries. So that's 11 attempts that he did not pass the ball, that he now said, I'm just going to take this and I'm going to go and I'm going to win this game and I'm going to play really well. Now, granted, Cleveland gave the ball to them probably more than they should have with the quarterback situation that's going on there. But he's been playing really, really well. And you look at the schedule coming up for the Denver Broncos and you see what's there. We'll get to that, Blurpy. That's important too. I want to touch on that. And you look at that, they play Houston this week.
Mm-hmm.
And Houston has been very susceptible to a lot.
Oh, they're letting points. They're playing college ball.
They're letting up a lot of points. The next game they play is against the Chargers, who are equally letting up a lot of points.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last game they play is the Lions, who we saw they're a pretty good defense, but they're susceptible to giving up points against good passing teams and good rushing teams. I think the Broncos are, along with the Texans this week, is a good matchup. And it's not one we thought was going to be a really good matchup at the beginning.
Oh, this might determine a playoff spot.
But this is a playoff matchup right here. 6-5, 6-5. And the Broncos, the Texans are stronger at home than they are away. So that's something to think about. But I think this is going to be a shootout. And I also think it's going to favor Russell Wilson's legs as well as CJ Stroud. And I think that both of these quarterbacks in this game could get a rushing touchdown. And I think that both of them will throw for at least a touchdown, if not 2. So let's get to Blurpy's additional questions.
Yeah, and then we'll jump into the thoughts I have.
But does it change anything that I'm starting Pollard 2? I just need to maximize points to still be alive.
Well, sure, yeah.
So, Blurpy, in my league, in our home league, I need to win this week too.
Yes, you do.
I think I have 4 Cowboys on my team right now. I have Dak, CD, Aubrey. I also have Micah Parsons, which I was nervous about an injury, and then I have Ferguson. I'm starting Pat Freiermuth because I think that what I saw last week is enough that I'm willing to sacrifice a touchdown that I think Ferguson will get. The Ferguson utility is the key to your matchup here. And it's the key to if you want to start Pollard or not. And here's why. Both of these guys are red zone threats.
Mm-hmm.
And
one better than the other, but they both get valuable touches inside the red zone. If we go and we look at red zone stats from Fantasy Pros, and we look at what the tight ends have gotten, and we say the last, how many games do we want to give it? The last 5, let's just go full season, and let's go inside the 15. All right, and let's go PPR, and let's go Cowboys. You're going to see that the touches are definitely interesting. So Ferguson has 13 targets in the red zone across the whole year, with 6 receptions and 3 touchdowns. Then you go to running backs for the Cowboys here. Same thing. Let's go to Dallas, and it will repopulate here. And Tony Pollard's gotten 33 attempts. So just projecting forward with Rico Dowdle getting 8 and then Deuce Vaughn getting 4. Projecting this forward to this game, if you believe that Dallas's defense won't score as much as we think they might score. You can't get a pick 6 out of them.
CD also has 13 receptions in that 15-yard range, with 3 to Turpin, 5 to Cooks, 3 to Tolbert. The reason I'm giving you all these numbers is important because if you think that Dallas is going to maximize their opportunities in the red zone this week and won't be filled with kicking field goals, the 3 players that you want on this team that are going to have the potential to score are Ferguson, Lamb, and
Pollard.
Now, Thursday night games, we've seen the ebbs and flows of Thursday night games. Some of them are higher scoring.
That doesn't apply to them.
But it doesn't apply today because they've all had the same amount of rest because they both played last Thursday. So they're used to playing on Thursday after this week. Now, you look at it and you go, okay, Seattle, what's going on with them? Are they going to play up? What's going to happen there?
I don't think they can.
I don't think they have the ability to. And we go and look at the stats on Seattle specifically, and we see that Seattle plays man at a really high rate. Are they good at it? Sometimes not. They allow the league average, and they allow first downs plus touchdowns at a rate of 33%. So you look at it and you say, CeeDee Lamb's a must start. Then you look at it and you say, okay, well, who else? Cooks, maybe, maybe not. But if they're moving that ball down the field as much as we think they will, and it doesn't come with a defensive touchdown, which might happen, there could be 2 defensive touchdowns in this game. Ferguson and Pollard are going to get the points. And if Dallas is projected to score, what's the over and under in that game, Joe?
The over and under in that one is 48.
Okay. There is no way without Geno Smith that the Seattle Seahawks put over 14 points on that board. And I promise
5 touchdowns for the Cowboys.
Okay. So that means 5 touchdowns for the Cowboys to hit that over and under. And Vegas knows stuff.
Yeah.
Knows more than a lot of people, want to say sometimes. But if that over and under is that high, they're projecting Dallas to at least score 24 points. At least. Mm-hmm. And so look at their team total. What's the team total? And
so Dallas is averaging 30 points a game.
What's the team total on FanDuel?
You mean the over-under?
No, I'm saying, you know how in NCAA they have, the end game.
You mean the – gotcha. Let me pull it up here.
And using this, and then we'll go to New Orleans for a moment, just to help you out, Blurpy, here. Because we wanna get you to a point where you're going to win this matchup, even if you're projected to lose by 14 points. We want to get you there.
Yeah, I feel the need. And as a general rule, so to answer your question here, Bob, the Cowboys. Cowboys' total projected points right now are.
It's got to be at least 24, 28 points.
The final score projection based upon the lines that I am looking at would suggest that they are expecting the Dallas Cowboys right here to have a final score of 28.5 and the other one being 19.
Okay.
28-19 essentially, or 28-20.
So you're looking at least 4 touchdowns. You're looking at least 4 touchdowns there, and you own 2 of the people that are getting their red zone targets. I don't see Dallas. I don't see Dallas not scoring at least 21 points. I don't see that happening. It very well could be that Dak runs in a touchdown, which always could be a problem, but I'm doubtful with that. And Rico Dowdle could steal a touchdown from Tony Pollard somewhere along the line. But
if you're playing Pollard, it basically means you have no other options. I mean, that's the reality.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's just looking at the tight end here. But Joe, go to the New Orleans game, and let's look at the projected score of that and the projected score for New Orleans and see which one we like better. Because, like I said, the key to Ferguson is the touchdowns. It's not
all right. The Saints projection are the Saints to lose 26-22 or 25-21, depending on if you're an over or under kind of guy.
Okay. And if we look at the Saints and their actual totals from the last 5 weeks.
Saints right here is going to be a 21-4. Detroit is a 26 against.
Mhm.
That's their margin.
If we look at these games that they played in, they played the Texans 20-13. They lost to the Jaguars 31-24, and I believe that game was the game that Taysom Hill did do well in. It was either that or the Saints versus Colts. Then Saints versus Bears 24-17, 27-19 against the Vikings, and then 24-15. So the key here is how much work does Taysom get? If he's getting 14 touches and 5 of those are receiving touches, Taysom could be the better play.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't know. And we don't know the red zone touches either. So let's just go to the red zone touches and see here. So if we go New Orleans, red zone touches for tight ends, you're looking at Taysom Hill over the course of the entire season has gotten 1 target or 4 targets receiving in the red zone, 18 rushing attempts.
Oh, no problem, Blurpy.
You're welcome, Blurpy.
I feel like you're trying to talk yourself into Taysom, but the reality is the Cowboys score so many more points, put up so much more yardage that they're almost getting the tiebreaker over everything.
But it's the Taysom utility that's the allure. It really.
Oh, I know, because you can see the highlight show where Taysom scores 3 different ways, and I get that that's fun and exciting. Ferguson, I don't even know if he's definitely the safer bet. I think he's the higher ceiling bet too. Like I said, I'm not sure that Taysom for Taysom to be more valuable, he has to score because he's not going to get you the volume. And I see Ferguson scoring. And I think that's just the way I'm putting it. I actually think everyone in the Cowboys is scoring today.
Joe,
it's going to be like, you get a car. It's going to be Oprah, baby. Seattle cannot keep the ball long enough to keep Dallas from scoring. This is going to be a party in Texas.
You ready for this fun stat, though? Taysom Hill has 1 reception, 1 target for 2 yards for 1 touchdown in the red zone. And he has 5 attempts rushing for 1 yard and 2 touchdowns.
Sounds like Jerome Bettis.
That is the most Jerome Bettis thing I've ever seen. And the fun part is the Saints also have another player that's done the same thing minus the rushing in Juwan Johnson, who, by the way, is an equal amount of disappointment.
Yes. Well, the whole Saints the whole Saints offense is, to be more specific. Like,
yeah, they're worth talking about. Let's be honest. They're
let's you look at this team overall. Williams was supposed to go there and be a stabilizing force, and nothing, absolutely nothing from him. The running back that they drafted on day 2 got hurt, so we've got nothing out of him.
Yeah,
this is and you have to imagine that they're saying that the coach is out. I mean, if you can't beat a division against a guy who's too stupid to give the ball to the 10th pick overall, you can't beat a division against that guy. You shouldn't be in the league. Neither one of them should be in the league, quite frankly. So Arthur Smith and New Orleans are both going to get fired. Lane Kiffin be great there. I just want to see Lane Kiffin there. Lane Kiffin reunites with Derek Carr.
You know what I'll be curious about in the coming weeks is if Staley is fired from the Chargers.
When
he's fired, how will it affect the play calling for the Chargers, and will it benefit guys like Austin Eckler, guys like Everett, and will that defense ever do anything? That was their much maligned thing going into the season. I liked them going into this season, but I hated the defense. I like Justin Herbert, but that team has got to be one of the teams that is. I mean, they have a record worse than the Broncos right now, which
they're the worst record in our division.
We played around with that, and to have a worse record than Vegas is
pathetic.
Is damaging. And how do you value, Joe, those fantasy players moving into the playoffs if you own Justin Herbert or you own Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler? I know you weren't a big Eckler guy going into.
Well, let me start. Well, I'm not a big Eckler guy, mostly because Eckler didn't want to be there and he showed it. But my first impression is this: I don't think Staley gets fired during the regular season, mostly because the ownership there is too cheap and can't afford the buyout. So I think they're just going to let it ride and just accept it imploding. Secondly, moving forward, we're talking about dynasty type stuff.
Right.
I don't think that them getting Belichick actually helps them. I think that if you really want to fix the Chargers, you need someone who actually cares about defense. And I believe Flores is the best coach available by far. And I think that would be very attractive to go there. Flores took a Minnesota defense that should be absolutely horrendous and made it respectable.
They were horrendous last year.
And if he can do that with San Diego, the Chargers all of a sudden become a legit Super Bowl contender. That being said, the rest of this season really, I think, is the fact that you have a soft finesse team that can't overscore people anymore. You know, it's you can be soft to finesse and outscore people by a billion. Quite frankly, that's what Miami's doing. Miami can't win a slug it out game. Miami cannot win there's coverage downfield.
But they play the Patriots this week.
Yeah, they do have the Patriots this week. And I honestly think that New England's going to bring them down to a physical level and the Chargers are going to crack. That being said, they're going to crack and still have a big play. The biggest thing with the Chargers that I think has been very apparent is Mike Williams really is the one who makes that engine run. And with him being out all year, they have
on that. That was a weird thing I saw. Yeah. It was like with Mike Williams, with a fully healthy core that included Mike Williams, Herbert was like QB1 fantasy-wise. Without Mike Williams, he drops down to all the way to like QB8, QB10 numbers.
Yeah. Well, Mike Williams is their downfield, make it easier underneath guy. And without him out there, you flat out have problems. And Quentin Johnson just hasn't become that guy. In a lot of ways, I think that we were wrong with what we thought Quentin Johnston was supposed to be. I thought he was going to be the replacement for Mike Williams. They're viewing him as the replacement for Keenan Allen. They're treating him as an underneath possession guy and thought that
but he's not good.
It's not how he's built. It's not a system. So almost certainly the Chargers are going to be going receiver first round next year or defense, but they never pick defense. They're stupid. Right. So if I were them, I would go receiver again, except the fact that they're not going to have a defense, and then second round, give me the best running back on the board. That's how if I were the Chargers, how I would do that. And I would put a very heavily minded defensive coach in there because that's what Staley was supposed to be, but never delivered. So that's what, if I were in charge of the Chargers, I would do without a doubt. And when we look around the league here, I said we were going to transition into quarterbacks that I think are going to be really good values moving forward. But don't look now. History is repeating itself. Trevor Lawrence is turning it on in November, and it's going to keep it going. People sat on him, eating losses, and people wanted to get rid of Lawrence. This is what you've been waiting for. He is turning it up and turning on. A running touchdown each of the last 2 weeks. He's putting the ball in the end zone, and they are moving it again. Jacksonville is their schedule is not horrendous. It's not beautiful. It's pretty average. And I would look at this and say, Lawrence is someone that you might be able to catch someone who's still feeling those earlier in the season losses. He's a guy that I definitely would want to have on my roster in the playoff hunt, just for the fact he's turning it on. And then obviously Mahomes is, but you can't really get Mahomes. So
the thing with guys like Trevor Lawrence is that going into these last couple of weeks, we knew that after the San Francisco game that there would be some better options, better things going on for Trevor. But you had to get past those games, and many people weren't able to sit because those losses would hurt them as well. So you're going into these next couple of weeks with Trevor, with Cincy, which is a blow-up spot, Cleveland, which is
they could have the ball the whole game just because Cleveland can't get a first down.
Then Baltimore, then Tampa, and a potential fantasy championship. If you play earlier, that's Tampa. If not, then it'd be Carolina,
which are gold mines.
So those are two great matchups for him. He still only has 12 passing touchdowns on the year. Still only 12. But
you look at them, almost all of them are in the last 3 weeks.
When you look at it and you say, okay, you look at the competitions that he's faced, you look at the defenses that he's faced, and you say the yardage output is there. He's thrown for 300 yards, 200 yards, similar to Carr's yardage output. And whereas ETN was going in and rushing in a lot of those touchdowns at the beginning of the season and in the middle of the season, now Trevor's finding that room and saying, well, ETN's getting stuff. I'm going to go in and I'm going to take it. I'm going to go in and I'm going to do that. I'm starting Trevor this week. And, if you have another type of quarterback to get you through the Baltimore and the Cleveland game, it is what it is. But if you had Trevor from the beginning of the season, more than likely you've already moved on from him. So we're talking to people that
I'm telling you, pick him up.
No, but I'm saying we're talking to people now that Trevor is either still a trade option for those people that are still trading. And, if you own him now, he's deployable at this point in time. We said it last week that against Tennessee, against Houston, this is where you're going to deploy him. This is where he's going to have the value. And those 2 rushing touchdowns are great. He's getting the yardage. I mean, his worst yardage games were against Indy and against San Francisco. And we know that Indy the
Indy one's weird, but San Francisco's normal. People don't score on them.
San Francisco one was normal because the pass rush was really good that day. And so, that's kind of where we're sitting. Ahmad,
welcome back, baby.
Welcome back. PPR picked 2 players to start: Breece, Moss, Devonta Smith. So I got to be honest with you. Out of these players that I have both Devonta and Moss in my one league. I'm really thankful that Moss came back actually because Saquon's on his
broken hand for the win.
So let's talk about it. This is a tricky one because there's some pretty good matchups in there and there's some injuries to look out for in there as well. So Joe, I'll let you start with your thoughts first.
So I've said this the whole year. It's true. The way that the Niners are built, you have to throw the ball downfield to beat them. And Philadelphia knows it. They did it before, and they're going to do it again. I believe that Devonta Smith is going to have an amazing week this week. And just because of all the way that the Niners play defense, it is set up for them. Now the question is going to become, now that they got Young out there, will they be able to? Because it's Philadelphia's offensive line, I am much more comfortable making that bet than anywhere else. So for me, I love Devonta Smith. I also have to say this without a doubt. He's been in the league for 3 years now. Every single playoff run I've been in, I've had him on my team. And I've only drafted him once. I always end up going out and getting him. He's one of these guys that is more consistent at the end of the year than the beginning of the year, which I love. Smith is my dude. And I do know that the Goater might play. Even with that being said, the way that the Niners force you to play, you have to go over the top on them. Smith is the one who's going to do that. So that's my first point. Then we look over here at the Jets and Atlanta. So
I shudder at that game.
Oh, I know, dude. If it wasn't for the fact last week that I totally paid out on that Giants New England game, there would be no reason to watch that. This is not one of our bets. This is the Atlanta Jets game this week. There's no reason to watch this. But that being said, there's also no good quarterback play on the field either, which means that they're going to run the ball like crazy into the ground. And when you have that situation where it's just going to be so fast and so few plays happening, I don't like taking offensive players from those games as a general rule. Now, Atlanta's defense is certainly nothing to write home about, but I don't think the Jets can consistently keep a drive going. And, they activated Rodgers to start practicing this week. He's not, even if he does come and play this week, it doesn't matter. I just don't want to touch it. Especially with the first week back, he's going to want to show off. So
he's not playing.
He's not. No, I mean when he does come back, I'm not going to want to play Breece that week either. So I'm getting into a spot where I don't even know when I'm going to want to play Breece again. So he's a value, I guess, but with Moss becoming the number one
for the next
in an offense that is much more balanced, because Indy has shown they'll throw it. Pittman has been a very consistent receiver, and they don't throw touchdowns to him. They hand him off. So because of the way that the Colts play football, let the receivers go up and down the field and let the running backs finish the job, I am much more confident that Indianapolis, first of all, was going to score much more points than the Jets. And second, I just believe your touchdown ratios favor Moss incredibly. Now, PPR makes it a little tricky for me, Bob, because Moss ain't going to catch the ball. But at the end of the day, I'm still leaning Smith and Moss.
Okay, so there are reports that Breece is dealing with a hamstring injury. And so bringing that up and bringing that to light, Aman, just some different information to think about here. When we look at time of possession in game, like Joe said, the Jets are possessing the ball for 27 minutes on average in their games this year. Atlanta's possessing it for 3 minutes longer. We are seeing last week particularly that Bijan Robinson kind of came out of the woodwork in that game and was like, I'm going to show out. And, you know, he was one of the players we talked about last week that we were really disappointed in. And, you know, if you wanted to try to trade him, you know, you could have, but maybe you wanted to wait on him a couple more weeks. With Bijan there and the potential that game could get a little bit spicier in terms of the run game, I like both running backs, but I don't like the way the Jets have time of possession in this game. Because like Joe says, that type of game favors a team that has a better overall team and a better overall rushing attack. The Jets are a very good defense. It's one that I think Drake London could capitalize on, maybe get 50 yards, maybe a touchdown somewhere in there. But it's also concerning when we look that last week, Atlanta only passed the ball 21 times total in that game, and they still won. This is
the point is that's how they have to win.
This is
they know that we were that's going to just diminish your opportunities for running the ball, especially if you're the team's probably going to be losing.
Yeah. So this is to the greater point here as well. So we go back then to that Dolphins game. We know Tim Boyle is going to be in. Tim Boyle had to pass the ball because they were behind in this game. He had to pass the ball 38 times.
They jumped off the run too early, too. Though.
I don't see that happening. So if we want to go back to a game where they were competitive in, that was the Jets-Raiders game a couple weeks back where Zach Wilson was in it. He still threw the ball 39 times with these terrible quarterbacks throwing the ball that much when they're behind in these games. I don't think they're...
Just a thought here. Maybe Sean Payton was right and the guy's a fucking idiot and shouldn't be a head coach or an offensive coordinator.
Maybe. But here's the other thing, too. In the game where Zach Wilson played against the Bills, Zach only threw the ball 15 times, but Breece still only got 10 carries, but he got 5 receptions. So where his value at this week, if he plays, will be as a threat out of the backfield. That is where the value will hold, because if they're throwing the ball 38 times, there's a good chance that all 38 of those times are not all going to Garrett Wilson, and they're not all going to Tyler Conklin. There's going to be Breece plays, and he got 7 last week. So that's my starting point. My starting point is Breece is probably going to get more work in the passing game as a back, but that work will be compromised by the time of possession. So moving on to Zach Moss, we saw what Zach Moss could do. We know Zach Moss fits into the system. We know that there's a very good likelihood that he just jumps back in and does his thing. And I am very
let's put it this way. The Colts have a chance to make the playoffs. They would not have had Taylor have the surgery if they weren't comfortable in Moss.
Well, I'm just bringing this back up. The last time that Zach Moss played the Titans, he went off for over 100 yards. 165 yards and 2 touchdowns. I don't think they were studying a lot of game film on how to stop him the first time they played him. The second time they play him, they may play him a little bit better, but we know the defense isn't as good as we thought it might have been earlier in the season versus the rush. They also have a good pass game. We know they're going to get into the red zone in this game. Whether those red zone touches go to Minshew or whether they go to Pittman, Zach Moss is going to be in the game plan. I think a low number for Zach Moss this week would be 50 yards and a touchdown. I think that that's a good floor for Zach Moss this week. So I think that for me, out of these three to start with, Zach Moss is my must start out of the three. Now, coming to another wide receiver that's injured in Devonta Smith. We know that overall that the Eagles have been pretty good, but the last couple of weeks has not been, stellar for AJ. That hasn't been stellar for AJ Brown at the very least, owning AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. But Devonta Smith had a great game last week. He had an injury designation last week at some point in time too, I believe.
He always has an injury designation. It's part of him.
But here's the key. Here's the key to this game, and what we want to talk about is this game favors AJ Brown as a threat down the field. Devonta Smith struggles in man and does way better in zone. And thankfully, the Niners play just about the average in both of these as the season goes on. They've been better at zone coverage, though. This is stats with Taylor Hufanga in it. He's no longer in it anymore. So you look at it and you say, okay, what's the game script going to be in this game? Are the Eagles going to be running the ball as much as they want, and who's going to get the pass? So for me, this game could be one of those games where a lot of points are scored, and I want games where a lot of points are scored instead of a game where it's going to be mostly running the ball and maybe a couple of touchdowns, maybe a couple of interceptions by both of those two quarterbacks. So for me, even though Devonta Smith has a worse matchup, I guess, than Breece in terms of all the statistical categories, I think that Devonta Smith's usage will be better overall. And I think that he's more likely to get a touchdown than Breece is. But I think Breece's floor in terms of PPR numbers might be a little bit safer than Devonta's in this type of game. But I think Devonta provides you with better explosive play potential in this game, especially if they run zone, which is the bread and butter for Devonta Smith. So long and short, Devonta Smith and Moss are my guys. But if I see that Smith's injury is going to hold him out, you obviously are flexing that to Breece if you can, in terms of the flex position.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a way Smith doesn't play. Just starting point. I actually think in watching the two of them, it looked like Breece was more dinged up than Smith anyway. So I think this is a starting point.
Yeah, and with these injuries coming about, and speaking of Jonathan
it's December, it's going to happen.
You're welcome.
Hey, no problem, man.
Speaking of Jonathan Taylor, a couple weeks back, we were like, wow, even last week, 2 touchdowns, 86 yards, I think he had last week. You look at it and you're like, man, he's back. When his thumb's better, he's back.
Oh, yeah.
Jonathan Taylor has climbed back up into that running back one realm that we wanted him to be last year. My question is going into this latter half of the season, what chances do you put of the Colts making the playoffs?
So the Colts making the playoffs. So right now, I actually have them as a very good chance of making the playoffs. Their schedule's soft, man. It is soft, and Cleveland is in trouble. The Steelers' offense is nothing to write home about. So when we look at the contenders, and let's give the whole list here. For the AFC, a quick little action here, Bob. Inside the coach's film, it's a quick sort button. So we get all of our information, just to answer people up front, is from the fact that every single game in the NFL has a wager to be able to put upon it. And when you look at the market efficiency of people betting downfield, in general, the bets that are coming in the future are done by the professionals that are much more accurate than the ones the week of. This is why we're able to find exploitations and be at 64%. So starting point is there. Jacksonville's clearly going to win their division. They're projected to get 12.4 wins. Cool. Awesome. The 9th team overall in the NFL right now is the Indianapolis Colts. Projected to finish with 10 wins. No, NFL period.
Oh, in the NFL total.
Wow. Is the Indianapolis Colts with 9 wins. For comparison, the Cowboys are projected the next team above them at 11.7. So there is a clump right here of the wild card teams being Indy, Cleveland, Houston, and Pittsburgh, with then a hard line of Buffalo and Denver. So the reality is going to come down to, in my mind, whenever Houston and Cleveland play off, how is that going to shake out? When Indy and Houston shake out, if that becomes a triangle of 1-1s, I think Pittsburgh becomes in it. Quite frankly, I think Pittsburgh's in it regardless, because even if one of them sweeps the other, the one that gets swept will fall out.
But the Colts follow their own destiny, though. The Colts have their own destiny in their hands.
The Colts, Steelers, and Cleveland do. That is true.
Well, I'm saying the Colts 100% do, because you're looking at it.
The Colts also play the Steelers in that mix.
The Colts play the Bengals. The Colts play the Steelers. The Colts play the Raiders, who
the Raiders don't have a chance. You don't need to worry about the Raiders.
And the Colts
the Raiders might not win again.
And the Colts play the Texans. So you're looking at that, and you're looking at that they could potentially win all 5 of those games.
Well, they win all 5 of them, I mean, that's just the way it is. But when I look at in reality, the
Houston has a lighter schedule, but I mean, you look at like I said, the game against the Broncos.
Houston has to jump them.
They definitely can beat the Jets. They definitely can beat the Browns, and then they play the Titans twice. So I mean, that division seems to be the Jaguars, but
yeah. So if you look at this right now, if you look at the AFC 5 through 8, they're from 2 divisions. Mm-hmm. And if you would have said this at the beginning of the year, most people would have said, all right, they're from 2 divisions. It's going to be the East and the West. Mm-hmm. It's going to be the Chargers and then Miami and the Jets from the East. And then from the West, the Chargers and maybe Denver gets hot. No one would have said it would have been the North and the South. Like, it's insane. But when you look at this and say, of those 4 teams, Indy, Cleveland, Houston, and Pittsburgh, who's the most likely to fall off the map? Obviously, the answer is Cleveland. They lost their quarterback, and then they lost their second quarterback. So they're all within half of a game of each other. So this is about as tight as a 14 grouping can be. And in the NFL overall, they literally are the teams 9 through 12. So the NFC, I think, is hilarious. They either completely phone it in or they dominate. They got 3 teams in the top 4 and then the bottom. NFC is bad. But it is certainly something that's there. I do got to say this also, Bob. I have been, and I still believe that this has a possibility, but it's just much harder now. That the New York Giants will get the 2nd pick overall and draft Marvin Harrison Jr., calling that complete parlay.
Mm-hmm.
With them beating New England, that is very hard because New England might not win again. And it's very hard to be as bad as New England and Carolina are, and Atlanta's still maintaining.
Hold on, Joe. I need to talk to you about this. So I'm just looking up. I just decided, because I know that the long odds, I know we bet earlier in this season. If you just joined us, feel free to ask a question. We're just currently talking about the playoff odds for some particular teams here. At the beginning of the season, I know I placed a couple of wagers that aren't going to hit about teams winning the division. Mm-hmm. And the Colts were definitely one that we were talking about. We were talking about how the Jets or the Bills could potentially win their division too. But I want to.
And Jacksonville didn't take a step back like we thought they would.
I want to ask this question to you because I think it's very important. Currently on FanDuel, there are odds of yes, this team makes the playoffs. No, this team doesn't make the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Here's 3 numbers I found based upon the 3 teams we recently talked about that I think are really interesting. The Colts are plus 118 to make the playoffs.
I would take that.
The Broncos are plus 146.
No.
The Bills are at plus 360.
That
How do you feel about that number? Because the
so
number is
all right.
minus
So let's
500.
start with Denver. Denver's already a game back of the playoff pump, and I believe they're going to lose to Houston, which is going to put them 2 games back with 4 to play. And that's really, really hard to do. I mean, it's just mathematically hard. So Denver essentially, if you're taking the bet of them making the playoffs, you think they're beating Houston. I mean, that's the assumption you have to make. The fact that they got the tiebreaker over Cleveland could come back to benefit them, but I don't see Denver beating Houston. I mean, who would have thought that would have been a relevant conversation 6 months ago? But I don't see it happening. So when you look at it, I think that by its fault is a problem. Now you dive into the rest of Denver's remaining schedule here. So this week, 3.5-point dogs. Following week, they're projected to be a dog to the Chargers, who can't win anything. Then they're at Detroit. Vegas is saying that's 3 losses. And then they end up with the home game against New England. Okay, everyone should win that. And then they're projected to win the home game against Detroit, or correction, against the home one against the Chargers. And then they go to Vegas, where if they need it, they should win.
Okay.
I think splitting against the Chargers is probably a fair assessment. Beating New England should always be a fair assessment. But they're not beating Detroit. And you give them a coin flip of they would have to sweep Vegas and Houston at that point, and I just don't see it happening. I think it's just too tall of an order for the Chargers there, or for Denver there. And when you look at one of the teams they're fighting, which is Pittsburgh, they got Arizona and New England in back-to-back weeks. So, and they're already 2 games ahead of Detroit. So remember, these guys have to lose 2 more games more than Detroit. Pittsburgh should not lose to Arizona or New England. And that New England one's on a Thursday night without time to prepare. They also are going to be playing the broken quarterback in Cincinnati, maybe Geno Smith's healthy, and then the last game of the year they'll be playing the Baltimore Ravens backup quarterback. Because Baltimore won't have a chance at the 1 seed, but they will have already clinched the division.
All right.
So they will be playing one team's starting quarterback, and that'll be Minshew.
Okay.
So the Steelers have the easiest route by far, given where they're at, and their team is still essentially the way it was constructed in the offseason. Cleveland is incredibly hard to project because of their quarterback situation, but they have this week, they're got the Rams at LA, which they're projected to be a dog at. They're going to be a dog at Jacksonville, but following that, basically their defense can win games for them. They're playing Chicago, the Jets, and the Burrowless Bengals. And the only challenge game in there, which might determine their playoffs, is they at Houston. So that's why I'm much more favorable for Houston and Indy, who both are 1 game back of the AFC North teams. But for Cleveland to miss, they have to lose 2 more games or lose a head-to-head, which they could do to Houston. So that's why I think Houston jumping in with the Colts as well is the more likely. And like I said, Cincinnati will not lay up against Cleveland the last game of the year. Baltimore will lay up against Pittsburgh,
so Joe,
because they'll have already clinched the division. Cincinnati gives Cleveland nothing. They act like the 300.
So I think it will be a fun experiment right now to think about this. So,
but those are my 3 playoff teams. To answer your question, it would be the 2 from the South and the Steelers.
Projecting that forward, as we think about this, and as we get into our own fantasy playoffs and thinking about the best players and MVPs and stuff like this, I want to take a look at some of the odds that I think are really interesting when it comes to the playoffs.
Yeah, can you pull one up for me?
I'm on LegalSportsReport.com, and I've got it shows me Caesars, FanDuel, BetMGM, and
all right. Can you look up a specific team for me right now?
I can, but I want to ask you this question first. So I'm looking at to win the NFC and to win the AFC.
You mean the championships, or to get the bye, or to win the championship?
Just to win the NFC, yeah.
Go to the Super Bowl. Okay,
the championship. And I'm looking at the top 4 bets here.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the Niners are at plus 190 with the Eagles.
Mm-hmm.
But the Cowboys are at plus 550. What's the pathway for the Cowboys to be the representative of the NFC in the Super Bowl? Because the Cowboys at plus 550 is very alluring to win the NFC. And to win the Super Bowl, they're plus 1,000.
So if I'm drawing a pathway,
let's answer Nino's question first before you answer that. You can get thoughts to it. Would you guys bench any of Rashad, Gibbs, or Bijan this week to put in Warren versus Arizona? Absolutely not. Absolutely
not. I don't know about
that. Here's why. Rashad has an incredibly good matchup.
That's true.
Rashad White's matchup is incredible. We also know that Bijan's matchup is incredible.
Bijan
because they're going to keep it on the ground. So the only question mark again is Detroit's game plan against the Saints. And when you look at it and you say, okay, what have the Saints done, and what's that scoring going to be like in that game?
Detroit's going to score more.
Detroit's definitely going to score more, I think, in that game. Joe also thinks that too, Nino.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just pull up how the Saints have been doing so we can give you a stat.
So as you're pulling that up, Bob, let me just hit on Warren itself. I know that he's the shiny object. People love putting the Steelers on the highlight shows because they're one of the biggest fan bases. And quite frankly, he's the only highlight material from the Steelers offense.
Mm-hmm.
But this is an offense that doesn't score points. And when you're looking at taking out someone from either Dallas or Detroit for a Steeler,
hey, Cruz, welcome.
That just doesn't add up to me. And also, I get that, trust me, I cannot articulate this so much, how much I hate the fact that Monty steals Gibbs touchdowns with a passion. And I think it's pretty much because it's Monty. I'm not going to lie. But Warren, while being their big play threat, is on a team that's going to score 13 less points and probably have 6 less first downs. And when you add that up cumulatively, I don't see a situation where you can bench Gibbs for me. You certainly can't bench Bijan. That guy's realized I'm losing my job if I don't give the ball to Bijan.
Yeah.
And he's finally doing that. And, White's got too good of a matchup. So I guess that's my answer here. Sorry, I want to
respond to Nino, and we're going to get to Cruz's question because that is very important for tonight as well. When we look at this, Nino, coming back from it, I understand it completely that you want to start anybody against Arizona, but where this falls at in is Najee may be favored in this new offensive coordinator's kind of viewpoint here, right? Where he got 100 yards last week, which was something as a Steeler fan we've been wanting to see.
Yeah, it is important to note that the Steelers' new offensive coordinator is their running backs coach.
But you look at these touches from Gibbs over the last 3 weeks, considering Monty's back. Chicago is a surprisingly good team against the run. So 8 carries for 36 yards and a touchdown, and then 6 for 6 on his receptions. That's 14 touches right there. Mm-hmm. You go to the week that just happened on Thanksgiving, you had 11 carries and you had 8 targets. So that's a potential of 18 total touches. And he does a lot with his touches too. You go back to when the game before Monty came back, 14 touches, 5 targets in a game that was kind of back and forth, and it was based off of their their passing attack. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be in the game plan. They're not going to forget about him all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. And he does get a lot. He does do a lot with his touches. Yes, the receiving wasn't there last week, but that's still 4 points per reception. And I know with Jaylen Warren, outside of the really great game, and we're big Jaylen Warren fans. We're big Jaylen Warren fans. Don't get us wrong on that. But where Jaylen Warren's value is in that utility role. He has a big role in terms of, how is he going to use his rushes? He's very explosive. He blew up against the Browns, blew up against the Packers. But Najee's still in there. And
Najee's not going away. They used the first round pick on him.
Away. But Montgomery's not going away either. But I think the
Monkey is going away.
I think the matchup's better. I think the matchup is better for Warren, but I think Gibbs is talent will also be a play there. I'm not saying Warren won't score, but I think you have to keep in Gibbs. That's kind of just.
And just to go for the full capsulation here to finish that point, the Steelers are probably going to put up the most points they're going to put up all year because Arizona is a horrible offense or a horrible defense. Detroit's playing a decent defense in the Saints, maybe even above average. Detroit will outscore the Steelers this week. So McBride or Ferguson? McBride would be my guy, but I'm worried about the injury report, and Ferguson plays tonight. All right, so first off, the Thursday night concern this week only needs not apply because both of these teams played on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
So the Thursday night part, we don't need to worry as much about. That being said, the Cowboys are going to blow them up. Bob asked me the question before you guys jumped on here of a pathway for the Cowboys to win this or to make it to the Super Bowl. When the Cowboys are at home, the Cowboys are an unstoppable juggernaut. And given the fact that I do believe the Steelers are going to play a ball possession game and they destroy running quarterbacks virtually better than any other defense in the league. Remember, Lamar Jackson has a losing record against one team, and that's the Steelers, because running quarterbacks don't beat a Tomlin defense. And given the fact that Kyler Murray is as intellectually, in a football sense, as proficient as he was as a rookie.
Joe, I'm going to stop you right there. I know where this is going.
The long story short,
Cruz.
Arizona ain't going to be on the field enough.
Yeah.
And Arizona isn't going to score enough for McBride to be relevant. And Ferguson is going to be in an offense that's going to run up and down the field the entire night. So take that Thursday night lead, take it into your week, and be happy with it because it's going to be fun. And McBride ain't going to do nothing.
And Cruz, as you know, McBride hasn't logged a practice yet this week. He has to log one to not get an injury designation going into the week. It's not the week that you want to go find a waiver wire tight end. It's not the week.
Unless you get Taysom Hill.
And with that being said,
Ferguson's better.
With that being said, you've got to go after Ferguson, and and the numbers will back that up as well, I believe. So let's just take a look at the numbers against the Steelers versus tight ends, and granted they've probably played some not great tight ends, but you're looking at it
twice.
You're looking at it. They played the Bengals, whatever their group was. They played Njoku twice. They played Musgrave, who had 2 receptions for 64 yards.
Mm-hmm.
The Chig had 3 for 28. Ingram was the highest scoring tight end for 2 for 88. And then I believe that was Dalton Schultz back in week 4, went for 42 yards and a touchdown. The Steelers have given up 2 touchdowns all year to tight ends and a total of 473 yards, which I assume is probably about average for most teams against tight ends.
Yeah, but slightly better, yeah.
And like Joe said, in order for Arizona to win this game, they're going to force Kyler Murray to pass the ball. And it could be a nice blow-up spot for Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown could put up a lot of yards against the Steelers secondary. But it's got to be one of those things where everything has to work out really well because the Steelers are susceptible to things like that. But again, with this newfound, whatever they did last week,
I think they're going to sell the ball.
Whatever that was that Kenny Pickett could throw for almost 300 yards, whatever that was, if they do that again, the Cardinals are not going to have
play action. It really wasn't complicated. They ran play action and they refused to do it for the last 3 years.
It was more like magic to me. Come on, Joe.
Play action is the greatest play in football in terms of every statistical metric, and the Steelers refused to do it for 3 years. But Matt Canada was an offensive genius.
So feel free to keep sending the questions out. we're going to get back into this discussion about
The
Dallas, and their projection, because for all of you that are just joining us that didn't hear, if you look at FanDuel, the odds of Dallas winning the NFC are at plus 550.
And they're the third best, right?
And they're the third best, which it feels like good value, all things considering that Philly and the Niners are plus 190.
Well, let me start with this. So in terms of pathways, I actually think they have the fourth pathway. I think Detroit has a better one. But
Detroit's at
because I'm drawing how does Dallas get there?
Mm-hmm.
Dallas cannot go through Philadelphia and make the Super Bowl.
Okay.
I do think Dallas is built to actually beat the Niners, but that's going to require now two things to happen. A, they have to win a road game in either Atlanta or New Orleans. If it's Atlanta, I'm not really worried about it. It's going to be a Dallas crowd anyway. New Orleans, maybe not. It's very hard to win in New Orleans when they're playing for something. So I see them as essentially having that because they're the 5 seed. Realistically, they're going to go to either the 2 or the 3, which is either going to be the Niners or Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to Philly. So the problem is I don't see a situation where Philly isn't hosting the game. And I don't see a way, period, that Dallas can win in Philadelphia in January.
But if they play the Niners, it's more likely.
They play the Niners, they could. But the problem is mathematically, they're probably going to have to play if there's one other wild card team that wins in the first weekend, which means either Detroit or the Niners lose, they go to the Niners. Now, granted, if Detroit and the Niners take care of business against what will be currently projected as being Seattle and the Rams. So, does the Seattle hold on? Probably not. And does Seattle go into Detroit and win? Definitely not. Do the Rams go into San Francisco and win? Probably not. So now I'm looking at not even in the championship game, in the divisional round, Dallas, Philly, and again, as soon as they have to go to Philly, Dallas is off the table. But that being said, I do think that Detroit could win in both of them. It's not likely. I wouldn't put a lot of money on it.
Right.
But when I look at this all in, with knowing that the two of them are playing this weekend, I think I don't like it, but I think the Niners are going to be in the Super Bowl. Because the only way you can beat the Niners is beat them over the top. And I think that given a dress rehearsal of seeing how to do the pass rush against the Eagles, the Niners are going to figure it out. So I just think that that's the way it is.
Knowing all of this, Joe, about the NFC, I want to flip it to the AFC for a moment before I get into a very interesting question for you in terms of betting for anybody that's interested in trying something out here.
But on that note, Bob, I do want to bring up the make the playoffs or not on the Rams, because I think the Rams is going to give you good juice, and I think they're in.
Let's get to that when we get to this weird NFC discussion that I want to have as well. I want to go over to the AFC for a moment, and I want to take a look at the odds of the top 4 teams here to win the AFC. You have the Chiefs at plus 185, which, is it worth a bet? Why not?
Yeah, again, this is talking about being in the Super Bowl, not getting the box.
You're right.
So.
This is talking about the Super Bowl. Ravens at plus 330, which I know you hate. The Dolphins at plus 410, which I also know you hate. And the Jaguars are sitting there at plus 700. Bills at plus 1900. Steelers at plus 2800. We know that's not going to happen. But a sneaky Houston Texans at plus 3100. Is there a pathway? And if so, which one that would take the Texans at plus 3,100 to win the AFC? Or are you more satisfied putting down a larger amount of money on the Chiefs to win, knowing that they seem to be the safest bet, but their passing game is suspect at best?
All right, so let me start with a couple of things in there. First off, Buffalo's not making the playoffs. They shouldn't be on the list. But I get why they are. They started so high, it takes forever for them to come down. Okay, that's fine. I do not like the Chiefs at anything less than 250. And the reason for that is they are a much more flawed team than they were last year. The Chiefs are an average defense at best. And again, they're having offensive struggles, and the weather doesn't get any better as we get into the year. Kansas City is one of the harder, colder places to play. And this gets into, when we're talking about pathways here, why Miami isn't going to have a chance. Because Miami only scored 7 points offensively against them in Europe. They ain't going to score in Kansas City when it's cold, because that game will be in Kansas City. Regardless of how it's cut, Miami has more losses on their schedule moving forward than Kansas City, and Kansas City has the lead. Remember, Miami and Baltimore still play each other. Miami does have to play Buffalo again, who'll be playing for their lives. So I don't see a scenario where Miami gets the bye at all. And I think that would be essential if they're going to get to the Super Bowl. So Miami's pathway, I think, is incredibly difficult, if not out. So when we look into who's actually going to get the bye between Kansas City and Baltimore, Kansas City has a drastically easier road. It's a fact. But Baltimore's the tiebreaker. So it comes down to the fact is, does Baltimore slip up? Baltimore has 2 losable games. Kansas City has 0. When you really look at it, does Baltimore lose one of the two? 50-50 odds said they'll lose one of them, and that'll be the tiebreaker. So I'm going in this with the projection that Kansas City is going to have the bye, and then your other 3 division winners are Baltimore, Jacksonville, Miami.
Right.
When we look at that herd of wild card teams, which again, I think it's going to be the Steelers, Colts, and Texans. Regardless of how those division winners and wild card teams configure, I do not see a scenario where either the Colts or the Steelers win a road playoff game in Miami, Baltimore, or Jacksonville.
Okay.
Either one of them. I don't think the Colts or the Steelers could do it. So then it comes down to build me an ideal pathway where Houston could go through and win. For some reason, Houston just beats Jacksonville. Like it's a thing. Like you look at their stats, historically, Houston beats Jacksonville. So that would be your ideal landing spot. Jacksonville ends up being the 5 or the 4 seed. Houston's the 5. Okay, cool. That being said, any wild card team that wins, because they'll be the only one that wins, has to go to Kansas City. And can Houston beat Kansas City is essentially what this bet is, because I don't think Miami gets out of Baltimore. And then it comes down to, can Houston outrun Baltimore? They lost to them earlier in the year. True. But if you're drawing the scenario, Houston has 2 incredibly difficult games to win. Dallas has 2, if not an impossible game to win. So I'd say Houston is more likely than the Cowboys, despite the fact they're radically different payout. Would I be interested in playing it? Yeah, because when you look at what they can do in terms of scoring the ball and the limitations of the Chiefs when they really need to score, they do it, but they do it in crock-pot fashion. Houston does it in lightning fashion. So that's going to be able to keep you in any game. And, you're playing with house money once you get to Kansas City. You get a team that's real loose, playing a team that's not, you can get an edge there. Again, Andy Reid doesn't lose off.
But the key is they have to get in.
Oh, they're in. Houston's in. I'm almost. I am most certain that the Steelers are going to be one of the wild card teams, but I'm incredibly confident that Houston and the Colts are the other 2. Again, it does require Denver and Houston. Houston has to beat Denver. Houston controls their own destiny just as much as the Colts do, and I think they're going to. The only thing that can hold them back is the rookie wall with Dash rookie injury, and I don't think it's happening.
Okay.
So I love that Houston has 3 different receivers they can lean on at any time. I love the fact that they just don't run the ball, and they just say, "Hey, we're going to outscore you, and we can." So again, the pathway, the ideal pathway actually is this: they get Jacksonville, they beat Jacksonville. One of the other 2, either the Steelers or the Colts, pull an upset. Which actually, quite frankly, Steelers Ravens could be an upset. We beat Baltimore, so that could happen. Steelers get Baltimore and they beat them. Houston gets Jacksonville and they beat them. So then Pittsburgh has to go to Kansas City off of their bye week, and Houston, Miami. That would be a shootout that I think Houston's more poised to win in a shootout than any other team in the NFL. And then they get Kansas City, who's not on their bye. I think at that point, that is the best scenario where they actually go through Jacksonville, then Miami, then Kansas City, rather than Jacksonville, Kansas City, Baltimore. So I think that's the pathway. When it comes down to it, I do think they can beat the Dolphins. I also think there's a chance that the Dolphins. I think there's a chance that the Dolphins aren't playing at home. They're not going to win a road playoff game. I think that's a very fair fact about the Dolphins. And I also just gave you the best scenario for the Dolphins, and I'm not sure they'd beat Houston. So I think that if we're talking about scenarios for Houston or really any of the wild card teams in the AFC, Houston's the one I'm most excited about. Zero excitement from Denver. And, like I said, there's no one out. Buffalo's not going to be able to make it. I mean, I'd love to see them get in. If they do get in, they have firepower. But they have to sweep like 4 teams, including the Cowboys and the Chiefs, in Arrowhead, which I don't even think is possible to win either of those games in Dallas or in Arrowhead, let alone both of them. And then they got the last game of the year against Miami. So I just don't see the scenario where Buffalo's in the playoffs at all. So like I said, of the wild card teams, Houston's the one I'm most excited about for making the Super Bowl. And the other one that's not even in the playoffs right now that I am excited about that could, make some noise until they play either Philly or San Francisco is the Rams. The Rams beat the Niners. So do I think the Rams could get out of Philadelphia? They would need to not play that game.
Well, let's talk about the Rams for a minute here, Joe, because on BetMGM, they're plus 6,600 to win the NFC, plus 5,000 to win on FanDuel. And with Kyren Williams back, they are 1,000% a better team.
Oh yeah,
than what we saw.
Stafford's healthy.
What we saw over the last couple of weeks. So, just looking at the Rams and their schedule moving forward, Seattle, we are assuming is going to lose tonight, which drops them. We already have that. Which drops them to 6-6. And the Rams right now face the Browns, which is a very winnable game. Then they go to the Ravens, which is a very losable game.
It is.
Then they go to the Commanders, which again should be a win. Then they play the Saints at home in LA, which should be a win for them.
Well, that might be a playoff determining game.
Right. Then they face the Giants, which should be a win.
That's a win.
Because by that point in time, the Giants will have completely given up. And then
they haven't
the last game of the season is the Niners, which would be a de facto,
Well, if Philly wins this weekend, the Niners won't be playing for anything.
Right.
So
that could be
that's a big thing. So, welcome back, George.
Hey, George, how's it going? Let's get to your question, George, and then let's finish that thought about the Rams.
Wait, we also dropped someone. We also dropped Chris Godwin.
Well.
All right, so let me answer this. We were talking about this earlier in the show here, George. I'm going to give you someone who 40% likely that he's available on your waiver wire, and that is going to be Cooks from Dallas. Since week 6 on, he's the 16th best receiver in the NFL. And if you're talking about upgrading your receiving spot, there's a very good chance you could snag him. No one's viewing him in this kind of light, as proven by the fact he's on 40% of waiver wires. If you could snag Cooks, not only am I snagging him, I'm starting him. But to answer your initial question, would I play Charbonnet or Warren? Again, if you can get Cooks, I'm starting Cooks over both of them. But if I have to pick between the two of them, I'm going Warren.
Yeah, and I think based off of our discussion earlier too, Joe, is Warren, even though out of these two players, even though Warren was relegated to a lesser spot in last week's game, Arizona is still a very not a good team.
Yes, that's true.
And the Steelers, showed some offensive proficiency last week. But I wanna bring this up because this is really important against the Cowboys. Is that in the last several weeks, I've been quite surprised at how the Cowboys have been like treating the running games of opposite teams.
Mm-hmm.
So the Commanders, obviously, they ran the ball 15 times with Robinson. Chuba and Miles split carries for 10 and 11. Saquon had 13 carries, and DeAndre had 18 carries. So, and Royce Freeman had 9. So, like, teams are still trying to run the ball on the Cowboys, even if the Cowboys are blowing their ass out.
That's because you have to.
So
two things happen in this situation. The first is that you cannot throw on the Cowboys. You don't want your quarterback to die. And the second is the Cowboys don't really play run defense because they're already up by 1 million. They basically are playing grab ass in the fourth quarter of half these games. So I look at it like the bigger problem for me isn't the Cowboys defense and how soft it gets.
It's
the bigger problem for me is I don't think I'm on the field.
Exactly. It's the time of possession here, George, and the time of possession favors the Steelers. So when you look at the Steelers versus the Cardinals, the Steelers are probably going to get Kenny Pickett involved a lot, and they're going to get a good amount of runs in, and there's going to be a lot of time possession that the Steelers are going to dominate probably in the late game and running the clock out with Najee. For our other viewer, if they're still here, Devonta Smith was just upgraded to healthy. So you look at it and you say, who do I want more? You would want to play Warren. And I don't really even think it's a question, but if it was a question for you, those garbage time touches, could it turn into Seattle's favor? I don't think so. I don't even think Seattle sniffs the 25-yard line at all in this game, even with a moderately healthy Geno Smith. I just think the Cowboys are just too good. And now, speaking of JSN, and speaking of Chris Godwin, it depends on the rest of your wide receiver room at the moment here, George, because I know we've been talking to you a little bit about your wide receiver room over the last couple of weeks.
See, I think Cooks is so much better than Godwin now.
Just an hour ago, according to NBC Sports, he was added to the injury report with a neck injury. Godwin was. And we look at it and we said that Godwin, over the course of this year, has been pretty much as average as you could possibly get. 53 receptions, 606 yards, 1 touchdown. He is not a threat.
You have Kupp, Waddle. Dude, you don't need another receiver. But if you do, again.
But I think more so, George, what you're looking at here is that you're going into a week where Olave might not play. You're going into a week where Deontay just showed you that he gives up on plays.
Blew up in the locker room, apparently.
You're going into a week where Cooper Kupp has had 3 bad weeks in a row. And you're going into a week where Tank Dell is obviously a great option, but also it carries an injury designation at this point in time. So I can see where the value is in Chris Godwin. Now, but he's not giving you like a tremendous amount of value and volume over the last several weeks. 3 for 45, 6 for 39, 4 for 54. So I think more than anything else, he's going to frustrate you more because if he does end up popping off, you're going to say, why didn't I start him? And you already have enough wide receivers of his same caliber and ilk that you don't need to go out and get that unless you want to keep him away from somebody else as you move towards the playoffs, which is not a bad decision because Jackson Smith's value is tied to the health of Geno. And I think more so it's tied to how they get him involved. And he has similar numbers as Chris Godwin as the season has progressed. 4 for 53, 3 for 40.
The thing is, Tampa has a much easier playoff road when you look at your fantasy playoffs here. So, again, I'm telling you without a doubt, if you can get Cooks on your team, he's a better upgrade than both of them. Cooks is someone that is producing. Like I said, it just no one looks at him because he sucked the first 5 weeks because he was playing through an injury. If you take those first 5 weeks off, he's averaging the 16th best of any receiver in the NFL.
I would definitely, if I had a choice, I'd definitely drop
ahead of, by the way, Olave, Waddle, and Kupp.
I would definitely drop Jackson Smith for Godwin, but I would think about it. I would hesitate just a little bit, but I'd definitely drop him for Brandon Cooks. And the only shining thing in Jackson Smith's arsenal here is that he does get those plays over 30 yards. His average is at 10.7, which means that he's being looked at downfield. He's doing when he gets his touches, even if they're a small amount of touches, he's getting decent amount of yards on them. He's only had 38 catches this year. Godwin's has 53. So Godwin is involved
in the pass
game.
Ask away, George.
Feel free to ask George. And Seattle is an enigma wrapped in a mystery too.
Hell, they're not. They're not a good team.
I liked Seattle going into the season, but they haven't shown anything. But is it because the schedule got a little bit trickier for them, or is it that they're just not good?
Geno Smith isn't good. I mean, I've been trying to tell people this. He had 6 good games last year to start the year off, and then nothing thereafter. And when we look back at who those 6 games were against, they were against really bad teams at the end of the year. No one thought Denver was bad at the beginning of the year. Well, they was. You know, you go through it. Geno Smith just isn't that good. He's somewhere between 32 and 28. Maybe that's a little hard. Maybe you can get up to 25, but he's not a good starting quarterback. And the vast majority of this NFL is better than him. That's just the way it is.
And the Seahawks haven't been offensively productive this year and in the slightest. So it's definitely something to think about. Running back to Christian McCaffrey and Pollard. I picked up Dowdle as a handcuff, but should I do the same with CMC? Drop JSN or Charbonnet for Elijah Mitchell? So the question you have to ask yourself here, George, is Elijah Mitchell the handcuff to own to Christian McCaffrey?
That's a big starting point.
So when you look at the way that these carries have shaken out, last week or a couple weeks back, Elijah Mitchell got 7 carries. He got 7 carries last week. In the Niners game against the Buccaneers, we saw that Elijah Mitchell only had 4 carries and Brock Purdy had 4 other carries. I don't think it's a bad idea heading into the playoffs. If you have secured yourself a playoff spot, to go out and get yourself the handcuff of your star running back.
I would say it is, but if you're going to do it, the one you need to cut is JSN because of how solid your receiving room is. I would want to keep Charbonnet as well because let me pull it up here. I don't want to speak wrong, but I'm pretty sure in the playoffs, or at least Seattle had a couple. Seattle has, as you look at their run in, assuming that you can get through, week 14, which is going to be the end of your regular season in most cases, the Seattle playoff run looks like this. 15 first week of your playoffs at Tennessee. They don't stop the run. Pittsburgh, hit or miss if they stop the run. Championship game, Arizona has never thought about stopping the run. So keeping Charbonnet as a back pocket for your playoffs is something I value much more than SGN.
Yeah, for JSN, I like Charbonnet more than JSN, like Joe said, season long, because we don't know about Ken Walker's full health. And
that's why I would do both. I'd do JSN, give me Mitchell, and then I got 3 handcuffs.
And the schedule for them rushing, it might get a little bit better here. But when it comes to the handcuff question of Mitchell or Mason for CMC, I think it's safe to say that you can, Mason's received more carries than Mitchell and has done statistically more touchdowns than Mitchell this year. But Mitchell's, I think, a good play, at least for this week, in case
Mitchell
something.
Hurt in the beginning of the year?
Yeah, but I think he's a good play and a pickup, not a play, but a good pickup this week for that home stretch playoff run. Because if CMC does go down, then you automatically have a starting block that Mitchell's going to get the carries and he's going to get volume. So I would do that, George. I would do that 100%. I'd drop JSN. I'd pick up, I'd definitely pick up Mitchell and keep Charbonnet because I think Charbonnet, like Joe said, has more value standalone than JSN. So your other question, George, Tua as your starting QB1 and Fields on my bench. I don't trust him. Worried about Miami's schedule in the playoffs. Is it worth it to pick up Rodgers or Pickett?
So basically, it's Rodgers or Pickett over Fields. I get that you don't trust Fields. Fair.
Or Tua.
Totally get it. But you cannot trust a quarterback on a team that's averaging less than 20 points a game. And I don't care if they change offensive coordinators or not. I don't care how supposedly stacked the offense is. The Steelers don't score enough points to warrant getting rid of Fields, who potentially could win you a week by himself. So you'll never get that upside from Kenny. I also don't think Rodgers is ever actually going to play. I think this entire thing is a whore play. So when I look at this, Fields is potential. If you still got your trade deadline open, I'd be open to having a conversation about moving him for a running back, upgrading Pollard in some capacity. But to do a straight out cut, I can't go there, man.
Yeah, and to Joe's point here, when healthy, when absolutely healthy, Justin Fields gives you, at minimum, another running back. What he doesn't offer you in the passing game, he gives you the potential in his rushing and his legs. So Joe and I were just talking about Trevor Lawrence a little while ago. Trevor Lawrence is 12 touchdowns and 7 interceptions on the season. Justin Fields is 12 touchdowns, 6 interceptions on the season. He had one big game against Washington, which was 4 touchdowns, and one big game against Denver, which was 4 touchdowns. The rest have either been 1 or 0. On the backside, on the backside of that, he does give you that. He has carried the ball all except for 2 games this year. He has carried the ball over 8 times as it's been allowed. And in Detroit, he rushed for over 100 yards. He's rushed for over 50 yards 3 times this season and 40 yards twice this season. So that's an extra points that maybe that touchdown, maybe that extra passing touchdown, that extra 4 points passing for the touchdown. If your league is 4 points passing, maybe it's 6 points passing. You get that extra touchdown through the legs. So you're almost equating it to a 2. He's getting, even though it doesn't show it, he's getting about two touchdowns worth of quarterback points a game through his legs. And to drop him for a quarterback, or not even to drop him, if you're even thinking about dropping another player on your team for Pickett or Rodgers, I don't feel that Kenny Pickett, first of all, Aaron Rodgers isn't coming back until like week 16, if he's coming back at all, because I do believe he's coming back to say that he beat conventional medical science.
Oh, that's possible.
That's the thing that I'm saying. He's going to come back to say, oh, I was able to do it. I was able to rehab and I'm fine now. Meanwhile, his arm is torn off and he's like, I'm good. I'm good.
I believe it.
Anyway, but back to Pickett. This game showed promise, but this is a quarterback that through the last couple of weeks of the season just hit 2,000 yards, has 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. And you go and look at his game log and you say, oh, well, the rushing touchdowns, like you said, for Justin Fields, you look at it, he doesn't rush the ball. He has 1 rushing touchdown with 51 total yards. He's been sacked 23 times, and he hasn't completed 200 passes yet. He's thrown 314. 33 of them this week against a terrible Bengals secondary, which almost every team has lit up. I wouldn't want him on my team. I had him on my team at one point in time because I needed to roster somebody. And I think it might have been against Baltimore or the Ravens at some point in time. So I got him on a pretty good game. But dog, you don't want Pickett. You don't want Aaron Rodgers. And if you are feeling any which way about Tua, Fields is good enough. He is. And I just want to, George, I hope you're still here to give you this.
Oh, no problem, man.
To give you this fact here. I'm just going to go pull up our fantasy football league and looking up just the cumulative stats for Justin Fields, because I know your brother owns Fields and he wouldn't trade him to me the other day. And Fields is on a bye this week, so of course he's not playing. 12, 12, 9, 25, 32, 3, 21, 8. So you got to be worried about the fumbles and the interceptions and all that stuff going in there. But you go in and you're going to look at Kenny Pickett now. Is Kenny Pickett on the waiver wire? I'm pretty sure he is. Because we're in a 2-quarterback league. That's why I bring this up.
Mm-hmm.
Kenny Pickett, 7, 9, 18, 2, 12. Now, granted, Justin Fields missed all that time. 15, 3, 10, 6, 5, 11. I'd rather not start a quarterback than start Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we're at.
So hope that helped, George. Hope you win this week because, that's why we're here. We're here to help everybody. So let's get back into this discussion, Joe, about the Rams and the potential. So what we're doing, everybody who is watching, we're talking about a couple of these bets going through.
Before we dive into that, let's answer this one. Hurts or Tua have 6 points touch on that part big. So I am inclined, and I know this is going to seem wrong, I'm very much inclined to go with Hurts playing the Niners than I am with Tua. And here's the reason why. Since the Miami-Kansas City game, Miami has not been scoring. There's a large part of it out there that it's become now common knowledge. I've been saying it for a year and a half. Tua can't make a second read, and people have figured out if you make a risk.
Get to your point, Joe.
Jam Tyreek. The point is this: I'm not sure that Tua over Hurts should ever really be a question. Hurts is going to put up points in this Niners game, and I'm not sure Miami still can. That's kind of my point at the end of the day here. I don't think it's as close as it would seem to be.
I actually think it is closer than you think it would be. And here's a couple of the reasons why. You're looking at, so just going from a game perspective here, game by game perspective, which we've been doing with a couple of the quarterbacks. Hurts is 18 touchdowns and 10 interceptions on the year. He provides the most value that Hurts provides is in that rushing game, like we said with Fields, 100%. 11 touchdowns accounted for in the run game for 410 yards. That's better than a lot of running backs at this point in time in the year. Now, when we go and look at the same thing for Tua and, so since 6 points per touchdown, it doesn't matter if it's a rush or a pass touchdown.
That's true.
So we got to look at where the touchdowns are coming from. Tua's up to 22 total touchdowns passing the ball with no rushing touchdowns. Okay, so that's a solid base 22, whereas Hurts is at 29. His yardage totals in games where we thought, Vito, absolutely, we'll get to your question in a moment. 30 attempts against the Jets, 39 against Vegas, 34 against Kansas City. So he's getting in still more, the same amount of attempts as he's been having, but the touchdown luck hasn't been there. Last week, he threw 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, got sacked twice. And like you said, I think the answer is Hurts too. I'm not trying to make a case for Tua in here, but just putting out the stats there. Even though Tua has a better matchup.
Tua has a great matchup against Washington. They just aren't scoring.
He could physically throw the ball to Tyreek Hill, and Tyreek could get like 245 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Waddle can get a touchdown too. But if we're looking at touchdown output, I think it's just as likely that Jalen Hurts gets 3 touchdowns this week as well. So the question is here for you, Stephen, is that do you trust the Eagles to continue to move the ball down the field against the Niners team, who probably is going to do some time of possession stuff in there, versus, a team in Washington who beat the Eagles last year in this weird game here. Do you feel that the Dolphins versus the Commanders is that it's an A+ matchup, 100%?
It is.
It's A+. You wanna try to take them. I just don't think you can bench Hurts to do that.
That's the
because
issue.
the points for Hurts will still be there. It's not like Hurts is going to stop scoring points. It's just how is he going to score them? And because there's no difference in your touchdowns, I think it's safer to play Hurts than it is to play Tua at this moment in time.
Bob, you're not letting me hate on Tua. You're not letting me call out the others. You're making me sad. Here's one of the people I need to call out here. I appreciate the question. Amari's on your team. You got to put him on the list. Amari's not a starter anymore. Amari Cooper, we're hitting the end of the year. He's cold. He doesn't have a quarterback. So just to jump off your list, I got to take him off. So we had Charbonnet, Breece, and Najee. We've been talking about Breece and Charbonnet a little bit here in the last 30 minutes. Of that group for the running back, I'm definitely going Najee. The Steelers are going to want to try to play ball control. It's a game where, quite frankly, Arizona is going to have a lot of incomplete passes. And I really think that when it comes said and done, Najee is going to be a big beneficiary. A lot of garbage time carries. And I think that's going to be one of the easy wins there with Najee. And then when we come down to the flex after we take Najee out of the picture, Bob, I think I'm leaning Downs out of that group. I know you love London, but the reason I think I'm going with Downs is basically the matchup. Tennessee's not a good defense. Indy's playing to get into the playoffs. Now, granted, the Colts or Atlanta is too, but I just trust Minshew more than I trust what's going on in Atlanta. And I think with that the case, Atlanta's going to force the running game, and Indy's much more balanced, and Downs has shown he can put up some points with Minshew.
So I'm in the same boat as you, Joe. I'm going Najee and Downs. I think this is the first time in a long time that we agree on the same two players,
especially with this many options.
I want to point out why this is important here. Last week against Tampa, yes, he should have put up more yards. Downs should have, but he had 13 targets after coming off a week where he had 3 targets. Mm-hmm. After coming back from an injury, because he had been, he wasn't out in the game against Carolina, but he only got 1 reception because he got hurt and then coming back from the injury. Prior to that, he has been targeted 7, 5, 12, 3, 6, 8, 6, 9, and then 1, then 3, then 13. He is one of the best downfield threats that they have on this team.
He is a downfield threat, yeah.
He would have gotten a touchdown and or over 100 yards if Gardner Minshew wouldn't have overthrown him a couple of times last week. You look at also that the fact that Pittman was a volume, 10 receptions last week was bananas.
And that's what he does.
We know what this game is probably going to be like. This game is probably going to be Downs and Pittman all the way to the 1, Zach Moss and Minshew punching it in for a touchdown.
Yes, it is.
That's what this game is going to be. So I think London is more likely to score a touchdown but he's not going to get the volume you want.
Yeah, so I would lean the volume.
Where I fall in this, Joe, is I think that Downs is probably going to get 5 receptions. If he doesn't get overthrown, he's probably going to get about 100 yards in this game. And you might get a surprise touchdown. But I think Downs is a better play than London this week with a better matchup than London this week. I think both Pittman and Downs will do very good in this game. But if they can't punch it in if they get stopped at the 5, they're not getting a chance to get a touchdown. That's the problem with these two players.
Fair enough. Hey, Bob, before we jump back into this, let me give you the 5 official bets so I'm on the record for them. We have them out there.
Hope that helps, Vito.
First one involves a game we've been talking about a lot. The Pittsburgh Steelers are a 5.5-point favorite currently on Caesars over Arizona. That is way too light. Give me the Steelers minus the 5.5 all day. The LA Chargers, again, a big disappointment in the NFL, is going to a team that's going to beat them into submission. And for some reason, the over-under in that game is 49.5 with the Patriots offense that hasn't scored since November of last year. So under 49.5 is going to be one of the easier ones of the week, actually. We go to the prime game of the week, which I wish was the night game. The Niners going to Philly. Somehow Philly is a 3-point dog at home. I think Philly should be the favorite outright. So I'm obviously taking Philly and those 3 points. We then go to the Rams. I know that Cleveland's coming into town. I know that I've just talked up the Rams like crazy. I still think the Rams win the game, but 3.5 points is just a little too much for me. I think that Cleveland's going to be really competitive in this in a way that won't make sense. But again, I do think the Rams are going to win it. Just going to be closer than 3.5, probably a field goal game when it's all said and done. And then the final one of the weekend for our 5th bet is going to be Kansas City is going to Green Bay. Currently, it is a 6-point spread, and they are giving no respect for Lambeau. Mahomes scores a lot of points. That's what he does.
Mm-hmm.
But when he gets in these matchups where it's like he's on the road, weather isn't awesome, Green Bay steps up more at night. I just don't see it being a spread them out, blow them out, old school kind of Kansas City game. I see it being tight. I still think Kansas City wins it. I think it's a field goal game. But that being said, if I get a tight game and 6 points for the home dog, I'm taking it. So those are the 5. Pittsburgh minus 5.5, under in the New England game. Philly plus 3. That's 2 home dogs, by the way. Philly is a home dog. The Rams, Cleveland of the points of the road, and Green Bay is a home dog.
So, Joe, getting back into some of these end of the year bets as more questions will come in. Here's an important question for you that I have.
Mm-hmm.
The NFC South. Now, currently,
dirty toss-up is what that is.
Currently on FanDuel, these are the odds for the NFC South. Plus 100 to the Falcons, plus 150 to the Saints, plus 470 to the Bucks. My question to you is this. Do you do all 3 of these bets, putting something like, let's say,
you can't, because mathematically the first 2 were both plus 1 somethings. They would have to be plus 2s to make it a profit. So you can't do all 3 of them mathematically. I don't think Tampa Bay is a contender at all. I mean, just to be totally blunt. So if you put 100 on both the Atlanta and New Orleans, actually using 100 to make it even math. You said it was what, 160 and 180?
100 and 150.
Oh, so it's 100 even.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you put it on the 100 even team, it's just a hedge that if they win. So you're not going to get a profit out of it. If the 50 team hits, the 150 team hits, you make $50 in profit.
Right.
So it's a way to negate your risk, especially if you're thinking that Atlanta is going to be stupid again. The reason with not going for Atlanta is it's self-inflicted wounds. New Orleans losing just because they're not good enough, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
So I can make an argument for putting the 100 on Atlanta, get paid 100 back, put 100 on New Orleans, get paid 150 back. If Atlanta wins, it was a waste of time. If New Orleans wins, I make $50. I can justify that argument because without a doubt, one of those 2 are winning. You're giving yourself a chance at some action. Again, if you're putting $1,000 down, that could be $500. You're basically paying 200, $2,000 down to do it. But it's a no risk situation. Maybe you get lucky, and after this weekend, Atlanta becomes plus 110 or something, so you get some juice out of it. But that's certainly the direction I would lean. Would be forget about Tampa, same bet on both, get the hedge out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just curious about it because I've seen people do something like 1,000 and 1,000 on the 2 teams that have those best odds, and then 500 or a little bit less on the team that has the higher odds. So you're not
Yeah, it's all a mathematical
hard.
equation, but with both of them being under 200, it's very hard to mathematically make that swing happen. That's just the odds math.
It's just intriguing to me because you don't see odds like that this late in the season.
Give me first pick overall
at plus money.
Or worst regular season record.
Worst. Oh, that's a good one. Before we get to MVP here. So, on FanDuel.
These might have to be the last two we do tonight, Bob.
These are the odds. Minus 140 for the Carolina Panthers. Plus 280 to the Patriots. Plus 250 for the Cardinals. Plus 7,000 for the Giants. Plus 9,000 for the Commanders. Plus 10,000 for the Bears. The Bucks and the Titans.
Yeah, unfortunately, Chicago's not going to be there anymore. So
they're at plus 17.
So Bob, as we do this, we do it based upon obviously what has happened so far, but based upon the projections moving forward. And Arizona has a win in hand over Carolina with 2 wins. That being said, the final projection that we have is Carolina at 2.55 wins and Arizona at 2.65, which said another way, Arizona ain't winning again. Can Carolina sneak 2 out? Now, that's what's going to happen because I do believe that Arizona beat Carolina. I think that's correct.
Let me look it up.
If they have not played each other yet, that is the bet. Will be Carolina needs to beat Arizona.
All right, let's look. All right.
Carolina. So here's Arizona's schedule for the rest of
the the Cardinals beat the Cowboys. That I still can't get over that.
That was the Cowboys showed up and thought it was going to be a nothing thing. So Arizona's not winning a road game, period. They're not beating the Niners at home.
Cardinals don't play.
Oh, they did. Correction. Arizona goes to San Francisco. They're not winning that.
Panthers.
They're not going to win a road game. They're not winning in Philly. And they're not going to beat Seattle at home when Seattle needs it the potential to make the playoffs. So Arizona doesn't have a win. We go to Carolina, who would need.
They could beat the Bears.
I don't think that's
Steelers.
possible.
Depends on what Steelers show up.
They're not going to beat. I don't think Atlanta's capable of winning a road game. Carolina's playing Tampa. That's a division game. Things get weird there. They go to Tampa, Carolina,
they
and
have
Atlanta.
3 division games.
All 3 division games in a row.
No, they don't. They have. Oh, well, yeah. Well, no, they have 4 division games on their schedule. They have Bucks, Saints, Falcons, Packers, Jags, and then Bucks again.
Yeah. So this week's Tampa, then New Orleans, then Atlanta, all in a row. Probably get destroyed by Jacksonville and probably get loose to Green Bay. So the question really does come between Atlanta and New Orleans. Could Carolina steal one of those games? Because I do think they split with Tampa. And that's essentially what this bet becomes.
Well, you're overlooking the New England Patriots, how bad they are. And let's talk about it. They play.
The problem with New England doesn't have 2 wins. That's true.
They play the Chargers. Then they play the Steelers. Then they play the Chiefs. Then they play the Broncos. Then they play the Bills. Then they play the Jets. If I'm looking at this schedule and everything shakes down, if everything shakes down the way that, we think it is, the Patriots' next potential win could potentially be against the Jets.
How is it listing the bet? Is it in terms of most amount of losses, or how's it doing as tiebreakers?
It just says to have the worst regular season record. I think if I go on FanDuel as we answer Bryce's question here, welcome Bryce, I can probably see how it's listed.
I need to know the tiebreakers in that. Because I see Carolina getting to 3 wins, Atlanta staying at 2, and New England staying at 2 for first pick action. Okay.
Love it, Bryce. Love it. Like Kobe and Shaq. Start Dak over Mahomes. This is a spicy question, and it's going to get me in trouble. I don't
think it's spicy at all.
I'm gonna say, and I think I own both. Because we're in a 2-quarterback league, I did some trades, and I ended up getting both, sacrificing, of course, Trevor Lawrence, who beat me a couple weeks ago. But I think where I go with this week is Dak, and I don't even think it's a question in my mind. I think it's scary to say that at this point in time because we know Mahomes, has that threatening ability, and we saw him just, find Rishi Rice for the first time because I stopped betting on him for over 100 yards last week. But we look at his record, or we look
Rice
at his
just
stats.
getting better, dude.
We look at his stats over the last couple of weeks, and nothing super exciting is happening with Patrick Mahomes. 21 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He's not where we want him to be at this year. These numbers are pretty pedestrian numbers for Patrick Mahomes. And, some of that could be stated to the whole Travis Kelce phenomena of what's going on. But you look at his
Mostly they wanted to be a running team, and that's what they are.
You look at his last 6 games. Against Vegas last week, 298 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's a pretty good enough Patrick Mahomes game. That's about 14 points or something like that. Against Philly, which he should have crushed them, 177 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. Against Miami, who he also should have done better against.
He did nothing.
185 for 2 touchdowns. He did not get a touchdown against Denver, which was absurd. Threw for 4 against the Chargers. And the last time that he threw for over 3 touchdowns was against the Bears in week 3. Every single other week has been 2 touchdowns. And there's been only 4 total weeks, 4 total weeks where he hasn't thrown an interception. Likewise, vice versa, you go to Dak. And as I talk
Dak at home is damn near unbeatable.
As I talk him up, the bookies are probably going, "Oh man, he's talking up Dak."
Dude, I'm telling you, it doesn't even matter. Dallas at home has been an unstoppable force this year. Exactly. Overall, and this is counting obviously the road games as well, the Cowboys are averaging a touchdown more than Kansas City. So when I look at it, more touchdowns on the board, more yardage potential, I want to be on the Cowboys offense just overall across the board, including quarterbacks, than I do in Kansas City. Kansas City wanted to be a running team. They're doing it. Obviously, they're winning a lot of games, but Dallas is going to put on a show. Dallas is going to put on a good show tonight.
To that point, we look at Carolina. The last game that Dak played that, you're like, Carolina has a fairly decent, pass coverage. It's, average at best, but held him to under 108 or 100. He held him to 189 yards, 2 touchdowns. You go back to his last worst game was against San Francisco, where they got throttled 42-10. He threw for 153 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. Every other game, he's had 4 games with 1 touchdown. The first game of the season was weird. He had 0 touchdowns that game. But he's thrown for 4 touchdowns 3 times this year. So the potential for him to do that again this week against Seattle's secondary is, not out of the realm of possibility, right? You look at it and you're like, okay, Seattle is, if anything, average at best against quarterbacks. You look at what Seattle has allowed versus quarterbacks over the last several weeks. They held the Brock Purdy for 1 touchdown. They held, where is it at here? Matt Stafford for 1 touchdown. But the last time they let up 3 touchdowns to Sam Howell. Dak is a better quarterback than Sam. So I'm on Dak. Joe's on Dak. I think you won't be dissatisfied with Dak this week.
I don't think you will.
There's always that Mahomes regret, as we all have.
I also don't think that Mahomes is going to blow him out in Green Bay. I think that Green Bay is going to be saying, hey, maybe we should be thought of as one of these wild card teams. And Green Bay's not completely out of it. So, I personally think the Rams are more likely to do it than the Packers. But again, I expect a lot of good stuff coming out of Green Bay, especially off that Thanksgiving win.
Yeah. And the last time that Seattle has actually not allowed a touchdown to anybody, it was back in week 7 when they faced the Josh Dobbs, Clayton Tune, Arizona Cardinals. So there is that to go with, that Dak is at least going to get one touchdown tonight.
So, Jake, to
Hope
answer
that
your
helps,
question
Bryce.
here, Bijan, we don't even need to discuss. You're starting Bijan. Across the board here, Bob, I'm leaning Pollard for all the reasons I keep talking up the Cowboys tonight. He's going to get something. And then, again, I'm so biased on this. I'm going to go with Mostert because I hate Monty.
I can see where that, the love.
I'm a Gibbs owner, dude.
That the love isn't there for Monty. I'm a Monty owner, so I love Monty a little bit more. But taking the love out of it, the worry that I have about Mostert is that if Achane is actually healthy, how much? So we said, when we were talking about Tua, we said that this game could get out of control really quickly. It might not, because the Dolphins have been playing not up to snuff over the last couple of weeks. But if it does get over quickly, it's probably going to be because they're going to put it so far out of control with their rush game. The Commanders, as we know, have been struggling as of late. They're definitely not putting up as many since the Seattle game. They're not doing as much as we thought they were going to do. But when you look at what the Commanders have done against running backs, they let Pollard, who hadn't done well all year, go for 79 yards. They let Saquon go for 83. And they let Kenneth Walker and Zach go for over 100. And they let Ramondre Stevenson go for 87.
So you are getting a touchdown on Monty. You know that for sure.
So when we go and we look at that Dolphins game, here, I think Mostert is a solid play. So if it were me and I was looking at it this week, hey, Recon, welcome back. And Kamara did great. Kamara did great. I'm so glad that you got Kamara.
Sound focused. You're jumping too many topics here.
Fields, I'm disappointed in him. But Jake, to your point, Bijan, Pollard, Mostert, I think, are the three guys you want this week. And I think that, like Joe said, Monty's probably going to get a touchdown. But I think that this game is probably going to get out of hand in Washington, Miami. And I think that if Achane is hurt, that the ball's going to go into Mostert or Jeff Wilson's hands. Recon. Kamara and DJ did their thing while Fields sold the shit out of me. Fields played like ass. I mean, let's be serious. There was no way that we were excited to watch that happen for you. Definitely sorry about the loss, but the trade was important. And like you found out very soon after, when Carr is with Kamara, it's a totally different Kamara. It is 100,000% a better player. So I feel for you. In our 8-team league, we had an issue in my game where I played against CMC. I got throttled by like 50 points. I struggled with, do I want to start Dell or Diggs? And it turns out I should have started Dell like I thought. Still wouldn't have won, but there's the struggle there. Then seeing Hurts have 6.5, then
it's a rough way to go when you play Hurts. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's definitely a struggle, and I feel for you, Recon. You'll get them back this week, hopefully.
Recon, your team is still solid from what I remember, and I think you'll be in good shape there. I really do. So Bob, I think that wraps us up here today as we're hitting 6 o'clock.
But
all you guys.
Before we go, Joe, I wanted to ask you about MVP.
The MVP is gonna be hurt.
Recon, tell us. I want to have a discussion with Joe here about MVP really quickly.
MVP's Hurts.
Before we go, and I want to hear about your trade.
He's winning it this weekend. He's winning it at home. 3 rushing touchdowns. The MVP is gonna be Hurts.
Hurts is at plus 150. We will, Recon. Yeah, we will definitely rate them. Just throw them in the chat. Hurts is at plus 150, Joe. Mahomes is at plus 350. But is there any pathway with how this season's going to shake out where either CJ Stroud or Christian McCaffrey win the MVP?
Definitely not for Stroud. They won't give it to someone who's barely getting into the playoffs. They're going to give it to one of the buys. Long story short. So
Good, Recon.
again,
Drop them in the chat.
tipping my hand, I believe Philly's going to win this week, and therefore they're going to win the NFC regular season, and that's why it's going to go to Philly over McCaffrey. So I think that that's the answer. And I do think that we're really at a point where people are realizing Mahomes isn't having the year he normally does.
Mhm.
And I think that in some ways he's being judged against himself.
Right.
And so you might get some people voting for McCaffrey. McCaffrey only gets it, the Niners get the bye, period. And I don't think they're going to. So that's why I leave it there. But if you want to put, if you believe the Niners are going to win this week, betting McCaffrey for the MVP is not a bad idea. If there's justification there, you can make sense on it. I just don't think Philly's losing at home in a game that matters. Like that,
Yeah.
I'm big time on the Philly bus. I'm totally admitting it, and that's the way it is. All right, Recon, we traded Kamara, DJ, and Puka. We talked earlier about how Puka's someone to get rid of. Oh, you got my boy. You got Cooks back. Yeah, dude. Cooks matters a lot. People are down on Cooks. Since week 6, Cooks is the 16th best receiver in football. He is better than people like Olave, Waddle, Devontae Adams, Kupp. All of those people since week 6, Cooks is outscoring. So you're the number 2 receiver on a pass team that's going insane. You should be playing Cooks, not just thinking he was a throw-in. So the fact that you got rid of Puka, who's one of the best players to get rid of for one of the best players to pick up, that's a massive win. And you're thinking of him as a throw-in that's irrelevant, man. That's how you know you want to trade.
Yeah, and to that point, Recon, what we were talking about earlier too was that we value Brandin Cooks long term this year, in an offense that is scoring, an offense that might want to, and an offense that needs to win just as much as the Eagles do. They're 8-3 right now. They need to win. They need to keep the gas on, and Cooks is going to help them do that with being healthy. You got Swift, who in the long term I think is a good value, because as the season comes along, if there's any issue with Jalen Hurts and his health, they're going to want to put it in the hands of Swift, who's a veteran back who knows what to do. And then you got Amon-Ra St. Brown. And while his schedule might not be like immaculate,
he's immaculate.
He is. Now, Nico and Pitts for Waddle and Njoku. That's kind of for me.
It's like a 50-50.
Yeah, I think the most valuable pieces in that are Nico and Waddle. But as we said last week, Nico's production is going to depend on Dell and CJ Stroud's production. Dell was the first half darling last week. Nico came along in the second half and got the targets and got the yards.
And Rico, if I'm remembering correctly, you have Likely, who you should be starting above both of those tight ends anyway.
So I like that. So you're going in this week to week 14. So Recon, yes, Justin Fields definitely sold you this week, but the player among players that definitely did sell you was Joe Mixon, because Joe Mixon has been purely unproductive, as we suspected he could be as the season would go on if anything were to happen with Joe Burrow. If something didn't happen with Joe Burrow, Mixon was a good target to go after. If you can still do some trades here, and you want to get a little bit spicy, with a healthy Aaron Jones, and like one of our other viewers said earlier here, like Bryce said, that there's a possibility for snow in Green Bay. Snow in Green Bay means running the ball. And Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon will run the ball. Trying to move Mixon, Fields, and Njoku for Josh Allen. I am 100% there with you. Josh Allen is on a bye this week. That doesn't hurt you because you got Stafford. Do that 1,000% if somebody will do that. I think that that's going to be super valuable for you, and you're going to be set. If you can win these next couple of games, you're going to be sitting on easy street. I like the way you're making your moves. You're thinking ahead all the time, and you're making your team better each time. So you got Kamara last week. You realized, you need a little bit more. You went out and you got one of the best wide receivers in the game, and you got good value back in return on the back end. Like DJ and Puka for Amon-Ra straight up would have been a deal that people would have proposed to you, but you just added in Kamara and you got back some good value there. Yeah, I think Mixon has to be moved, Joe, and I know that you agree with that. I think he has little to zero value moving forward, and I think that people still will value him for his name, and that's about it. But Fields, even after last week's game, you can still push the narrative of the rushing quarterback. As before we said, Fields struggled this week, but Fields or Tua is better than a combination of putting Pickett on your team and putting Rodgers on your team. So Recon, we're really happy to see where you're at. Feel free if that trade goes through, post a comment on this video and let us know so that we know what your team looks like going into this next week, and we can
pull for you, Recon. Pulling for you.
Of course, as long as my team does good too, right? I think I'm playing a couple of these guys, so I need some luck as well this week in my league. So I feel that.
You also might want to consider playing Cooks. I mean, telling you, Cooks is going to be a good play.
Hopefully Jefferson comes back this week because Dobbs need him. Four interceptions last week for Dobbs was terrible. Yeah, Recon, ask it real quick, and then we're gonna head out. I love these start-sit questions a lot too because I struggle. I struggle with my own team thinking about which one I want to put in, and usually with this Tank Dell, it's all about Tank Dell. Every single decision that I have in my life, fantasy-wise, is about Tank.
And this is why Cooks is so much more valuable than him. Cooks plays. Cook was hurt early in the year. People hate him. He's been playing and producing ever since. It's been lovely.
And Tank Dell, it's either he does really well, or he's hurt, and it's like, what am I going to do here? What's going to happen? So, and then last week, Joe, like I said, the Diggs and AJ Brown. AJ Brown was like. But all those Thursday Thanksgiving games screwed me up last week in my own roster.
Yeah, Bob. I mean, you're in a win out and need help situation for our league, and I'm in a win and I'm in scenario, which I love.
You're in a win and you're in. Oh man, Justin just picked him up.
Which one?
Zach Moss. I put it in for 8 and he put it in for 10.
I'll do it.
So definitely, Recon, put it. We do have to get going because I believe Joe has an event to get to.
I do.
So my team right now is Stafford, Mixon, Jones, Swift, Amon-Ra, Waddle, and Njoku. If the Packers are healthy in terms of Jones and Reed, I still have Brandon Cooks. So who do I start? I'm on the boat here that I'm starting Jones and Swift before I start Mixon. I'm on Ross St. Brown and Waddle, of course.
I'm on Cooks over Waddle.
Njoku. But in terms of health here, if I am picking a flex as my flex here, Recon, I would love Cooks as a flex right now.
See, but you can't do it. So the way I would do this is I'd put Cooks as my second receiver right now. Likely should be your tight end, by the way. And then your flex is going to either be Waddle or Jettis, depending upon the health of them going into it. Obviously, Jettis stays on the bench. Waddle is your flex. But Cooks should be a must start. Dude, I'm telling you, he's getting at least a touchdown in 70 tonight. Cooks is going to produce, and he's been outproducing Waddle for the last 6 weeks.
Yeah, and that's definitely fair enough. And when we look at how Seattle has fared against wide receivers, especially their man coverage, they do man coverage 30th. They do zone coverage more. Brandon Cooks is very good in the zone as well. Lamb is the primary target there, but this is a game where they could put the best cornerback that they have on Lamb, and then Cooks goes off for 100. I'm not sure if Jones or Reed will come back. Yeah, these injuries this late in the year are a little bit tricky, and with Jalen Reed has been playing really well, and it's unfortunate when we look at when we look at it in this back-to-back practices that he missed. And that's not good, like we said to the Trey McBride owner earlier. Yeah, if Jefferson plays, this is a no questions asked. It doesn't matter if Mixon is your quarterback or your running back here. That core of wide receivers with Cooks at your wide receiver 2 and potentially Jefferson as your flex will just completely steamroll teams. I really think you have a really good chance.
And then obviously you got it right. You can't play Likely. He's on a bye. But still, when you come back and your playoff team has Likely in it and all he does is check down on your tight ends, you're going to be good set. Mm-hmm. So, all right, guys, it was an awesome week. We're glad to be back at our normal time. We'll be back with you next week, 3:45 on Thursday.
Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate